Tonight, of course, we talk about the riots that have taken place, the disgusting attempt to try and pin the riots on me, and do we have two-tier policing? Because that's becoming a very common perception around the country. We'll also discuss, has the UK now effectively put an arms embargo on selling weapons to Israel? Is that the reality or not? And Priti Patel has joined Patrick Christie's to do a big exclusive interview, and of course it's part of her leadership bid for the Conservative Party. Patrick will come in and tell us ahead of the full interview later on tonight some of the highlights from that. But before we get to the programme, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler. Good evening. Since I was last with you, we have seen rioting and violence on an horrendous level. The Prime Minister seeks to blame it all purely on the far right. And yes, of course, there are far-right thugs. And some of the actions, such as setting fire or attempting to set fire to hotels with people in them, are truly disgusting and appalling. But we can't say it's all on one side. Last night we saw in some parts of the country mobs of young Muslims masked, acting in a very intimidatory way, indeed threatening journalists, slashing tyres, making people from Sky News and LBC flee the scene. We even saw a pub that was surrounded and intimidated. So there's fault on all sides. Street violence is never, ever right. I've spent 30 years fighting elections, some successful, some unsuccessful, because I believe in solving problems via the ballot box. Personally, I have to say I'm pretty disgusted by comments made by people like Andy McDonald from the Labour Party, Anna Soubry, former Conservative MP, broadcasters like James O'Brien on LBC, calling these Farage's riots. People saying, actually, I've been orchestrating, organising, encouraging the riots. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that level of incitement to hatred against me, I've had to have a very significant change in my security situation over the course of the weekend. But I guess there are some who are frightened that politically one day I could benefit from what is going on. Well, that's not what interests me. What interests me is not just ending these riots and not just quelling them for now. I don't want to live in France, where these divisions occur once every few months, where parts of big French cities effectively almost become no-go zones. I want to find long-term solutions. And one of the problems here, at least one of the perceived problems here, is two-tier policing. Now, right or not, and we'll debate that in just a moment, but right or not, there is a widespread perception of two-tier policing. I believe it began at the time of the Black Lives Matters protests. You know, we saw people literally tearing down statues and chucking them in the dock and nobody actually being stopped from doing it. We saw Churchill's statue defaced. We saw the cenotaph defiled and police officers taking a knee in the street, supporting a Marxist organisation. And it goes on from there to a common perception that the way the riots in Leeds were handled compared to the way the riots in Southport were handled were very, very different. None of this, folks, is aimed at all at the men or women on the front line. And frankly, it is truly appalling how many police officers have been hurt over the course of the last few days. Do we have two-tier policing? Are we led by two-tier care? That's our debate to begin this evening. I'm joined by former Detective Chief Inspector of the Met Police, Peter Kirkham, and my panel this evening is Andrew Rosindell, Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, and Paul Richards, not only a former Labour Special Advisor, but also somebody who ran to be a Police and Crime Commissioner. Two-tier policing, Andrew Rosindell, what's your take?
The police are there to protect the public, and they have to apply the law equally to all people. This is the laws of this country that should apply equally to every citizen and to all communities. If we get to a stage where the public are losing confidence that the police are applying that law equally, we have a serious problem on our hands.
Is that where we are?
I'm afraid I think that many people do think so. We've seen how the aggressive marches through London about Gaza, we've seen how they've been policed, compared to other types of protests and marches where the police have seemed to have been much more aggressive towards those who are protesting. It's not a good look. Now, I support the police, and we must support the police. They're there to do a job to protect our country and to protect the law-abiding citizens. But too much politics has been going on in the police for too long. They've been too politicised. I want them to get back to doing the job that the British people want them to do, to treat everyone equally and to ensure that the law is obeyed by all.
Stay with my panel as we discuss a war of words that has broken out between the owner of X, Elon Musk, and Keir Starmer. What on earth is going on? Well, Elon Musk calls himself a free speech absolutist. That's why he bought Twitter and rebranded it X. And many of the debates that we have these days wouldn't have happened if Musk hadn't bought Twitter. Now, you can argue there are good things about that. You can argue there are bad things about that. But he certainly believes in free speech. And he appears to be strongly of the view that in the United Kingdom, we are losing our rights of free speech. And over the last 48 hours, he's really gone to town in the most extraordinary way. Musk, arrested for making comments on Facebook. Is this Britain or the Soviet Union? He publishes a cartoon of some armed cops outside a house with a woman looking through the door. We saw your memes, step outside. And he's gone on from his Soviet Union quotes to saying that Keir Starmer is two-tier. Keir, he says, why aren't all communities protected in Britain? And he's really had a go at this. He said, look, you know, a masked mob of Muslim men were intimidating people in the West Midlands last night and nothing happened. And yet, you know, if you're branded far right, the police will crack down. And on and on and on. What is going on? Makes the point, you know, that social media can be a force for bad. Equally, I make the point it can be a force for good. Do you fear a civil war in this country?
No, I don't believe that's going to happen. But I do believe there's a groundswell of disgruntlement. A lot of people are unhappy. The election results proved that. No party really won the election in terms of votes. 34% for a Labour government.
A third of the votes and two-thirds of the seats.
Absolutely. So, you know, people are not happy, Nigel, and you know this, I know this. People are very disgruntled with our political system. And one of the things they're very unhappy about is the idea that the British way of doing things is being gradually undermined, and freedom of speech is fundamental to that. A British sense of humour is fundamental to that. And it seems to me that the politically correct brigade, the woke fanatics, they get away with it. They can condemn everybody and everyone, and if you dare to question anything, you're supposedly far right. See, so this needs to be dealt with.
This I worry about. See, I worry. There was enormous pressure on Labour candidates and Labour leadership during the general election to stop arms being provided and sold to Israel. And we get a news report overnight. British civil servants appear to have suspended the processing of arms export licences for sales to Israel, pending the completion of a wider government review into the issue. Rosindell, of course, won't be surprised by this at all.
No, the whole thing is alarming. I rather feared that a Labour government would take this type of approach. I fear for Israel. Israel is a democratic country. It's part of the free world. And if we don't stand with Israel and we allow extremists and terrorists and outside organisations, Iran to fund Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis are now getting involved. This is a very dangerous situation for Israel. And I think the ultimate objective with these people is to push Israel out, to obliterate Israel. And that's what really worries me. So Labour is playing into their hands.
It would be fair to say, Andrew Rosindell, that it was the Conservative government who went along with Obama, who went along with the European Union, who went along with the whole let's be nice to Iran policy, which freed up huge amounts of money, which they used to fund these terrorist organisations.
Well, it might have been a Conservative government, but it wasn't the kind of policy that many people on the Conservative benches particularly agreed with.
But
I was one of them. Of course. But of course, mistakes have been made. But what we're seeing today is the Labour Party moving in the direction of actually risking the possibility of Israel being continuously attacked and not standing with them, which is what we should be doing.
Paul makes the point, it's a better party than it was when Corbyn was leading it.
Well, I think they're missing the point that Andrew pointed out, which is at the crux of this. This is the Islamic Republic of Iran. The war that Israel's fighting is now won, unfortunately, on 7 fronts, but Iran stands behind all of them. And what we have seen, especially with these latest revelations with respect to arms licensing, and let's be clear, this is not aid. This is not taxpayer...
Well, there's two separate things.
Yeah, of course. I've seen it referred to. But on the arms licensing front, this is exporting British product for commercial reasons, and doing so in circumstances where every review so far by the last Conservative government, by the Americans, has found that Israel is committed to complying with international humanitarian law. Nothing has changed. So it's a policy decision that seems to have been driven by politics, which is missing the encouragement that it is giving to the Islamic Republic and all of its proxies that are supposed to be seeking to wipe Israel off the map, beginning a massive barrage of firing against the Jewish state this evening.
Natasha Hausdorff, thank you for joining me. Andrew Rosindell, Paul Richards, thank you for joining me. We've covered some subjects there, but my goodness me, there's a lot going on in the world. Thank you all for joining me. All I will say is it does feel to be increasingly that Israel is just running out of friends all over the world. They're in a very, very tight spot indeed, and I just feel that the pressure on this Labour government that's going to come from the left and the growing threat of that sectarian vote is something that will force Labour further and further away from Israel. That's my fear.